Hello there, Natalie.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining me in my room. We'll see how
You're
many we
welcome.
get today. I think I had like 3 last time, so we'll see. Hopefully, we'll get just a couple more, and then we'll obviously get started. Hi, Allie.
Hey.
Just waiting for a few more to hop in before I start. Unless there won't be anyone else, then I'll just go.
All right, perfect. And I'll just keep circling back through, so don't mind
All
me.
right, you're fine. Not sure if everybody's in the rooms yet. Let me see if I can check. Oh yeah, it does look like. Wow. Oh no. Well, it looks like you're the only one in here with me, Natalie. Well, thank you for coming in here. Because if you weren't, that would be really boring to give this presentation to nobody. But anywho, thank you so much for joining me in here. I wonder if you decided to come to the feedback room because you maybe have mixed feelings about feedback. I know that several people that I know personally, even myself, have a love-hate relationship with feedback, right? Because it can be positive, negative, it can be done very well, and it can also be done very poorly. So that's the main reason why I chose to do feedback, because I know that it's just such a great tool when it's used the correct way, basically. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about how to give me feedback, obviously, but we're also going to talk about, like, the what, the when, the why. We're going to kind of dissect all of those areas. So we're going to give a look here at our agenda. As you can see our agenda on here, we're going to talk about defining feedback and what it really means first. Then we're going to jump into why it's critical, the different types of feedback, how to give feedback, feedback as a performance management tool, application, and then conclusion and questions at the end. So we're going to start first with what is feedback, of course, and we have to kind of know what feedback is exactly before we can talk about how to do it the right way. And so I'm just curious, how would you define feedback if you had to? If somebody said to you, Natalie, what is feedback? What would you say? You can type it in the chat box, you can hop on your mic. What is kind of the first thing, maybe, or maybe just some thoughts that might pop into your mind when you hear that word feedback?
The best I can describe it is constructive criticism.
Wonderful.
From a
Absolutely. I
teacher
would totally
perspective,
agree.
or constructively criticizing
Yes,
progress.
exactly. Progress. Awesome. Thank you, Allie. Glow or grow. That's amazing too, because as I said at the beginning, it can be positive or negative. It can be done in a good way, in a bad way. But if it's done right, then you should see some good things and then maybe some not so good things you can work on too. So I have a really good definition here that I love. This is the one that I would use. And what I like to say is it's a process of communication where employees are given information about their performance. Now, there's some words that really pop out to me when I hear that and see that. So I'm curious, are there any words in there that really kind of pop out to you as really important when you're talking about feedback?
Process and performance.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Thank you. Yes, process. That's exactly what feedback is. It is a process. It is not a one and done. It is not a let me just get this out of the way and we don't need to worry about it anymore kind of thing. It is definitely a process. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at next. And you can see here it's continuous, right? Feedback should never stop. It should be continuous. And so if you start at the feedback point, you can see that the feedback first has to reach the employee or whoever it is that you're talking to, whoever it is that needs the feedback. It's going to get there first. They're going to engage in the feedback, whatever that looks like. And then you would hope that it would go to the next part of this cycle where the manager, the employee, or whatever that relationship is, they will come together to discuss what that feedback is and what it means. And then you get to the part where you have those outcomes. Okay, what are we looking for? What happened here? Did we meet these things? And hopefully you get to the point where you have the employee feeling motivated going forward from that feedback. Because if it's done correctly, then somebody would say, okay, this is what I'm going to do going forward. And they feel motivated and positive coming from that experience. And of course, then, because it's a process, they will go back to the feedback again of saying, okay, I've done this thing. How is it looking now? Am I doing better or looking in a different area? And so it's continuously a cycle that is to be in a good way, positively, of course. We would want it to continue on and on to benefit the person who's receiving the feedback, but also whoever they're working for, it would benefit them as well. Do you have any questions about this diagram or anything? Okay, and I'll also mention too, at the end of this presentation, I have a takeaway document that's going to have all of the resources that I talk about today. So if I happen to skim past anything briefly, you can just look at that a little more in depth from the resources and things that I've used to create this presentation today. So you ask yourself, well, why is feedback so important then? You know, we see, okay, it's a cycle and all that, but why is it really even important? Why do you really need it? Well, there's a couple of statistics that are pretty startling, I think. The Harvard Business Review survey said that 72% of the people that were surveyed agreed that their performance would improve if their managers would provide corrective feedback. So that's coming from people who don't get corrective feedback. They're actually saying, hey, please give me feedback. I need feedback. And it's not just feedback, it's corrective feedback. We'll talk about what that means in a moment, but you would think that these people, they want to hear what they can do to improve. They actually want to hear that. Sometimes we think the opposite. Well, they don't want to hear what they're doing wrong. They would rather just pretend like everything's fine. Well, actually, as this survey shows, more people, probably 3 out of 4 people would say, I actually do want that feedback. I do want to be told what I can do better. And 92% agreed that negative feedback, obviously if it's done appropriately, is effective at improving their performance. That's almost everybody who was surveyed said, hey, negative feedback, even if it's negative, it will make me do better in my job if it's done the correct way. How do we do that? We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, we have 3 different kinds of feedback, 3 different types of feedback. So as we just talked about for a second, corrective feedback, that's the kind of feedback you would get when you want to hear exactly how to improve. So it's information that is provided about the way their work performance or behavior can be improved. 57 preferred corrective and 43 preferred praise recognition. So as you can see there, more people said, I would actually rather you tell me what I need to do better than just to tell me I'm doing a great job. Instead of just a pat on the back, actually tell me what I can do to improve my performance. Constructive is non-critical, meaningful observations or behavior or performance on behavior or performance with the intent to foster positive change. So this is the constructive feedback that you were talking about at the beginning, where you would give somebody just some feedback on what you observe. So you would just say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. You're not necessarily saying for them to do anything. You're just telling them this is your observation, a meaningful observation. So something that actually is important, not just a, casual thing, but just a meaningful observation that you have. And obviously it would be in a professional way. And then the last thing is complimentary, which it always feels good when you get that positive reinforcement, your performance, behavior, and that motivates the growth and the development. So that would just be that great, good feeling feedback you get when someone's just saying, hey, you're doing a great job. Keep up the great work. And then even all the other things you could say too that would help to reinforce what that employee or that person's already doing. So you would want to continue. You would want them to continue what they're doing. So you would say, hey, you're doing a great job. So do you have any questions or comments about the 3 types of feedback? Awesome. Alrighty, we're gonna truck right along here. So how and when to give the feedback then? You ask yourself, okay, I know that I need to give feedback. I know the kinds of feedback that I can give, but how and when do I give feedback? If you're a person that needs to give somebody feedback, what are some of the things you might give them feedback on? What are some of your ideas on what somebody would need feedback on? What do you think? You can type it, chat it.
Well, from the performance review standpoint, like teachers need feedback on the instructional strategies that they're using in their live sessions, but also from the teacher standpoint, you need to provide feedback on what students are doing well or what they can improve upon when grading assessments or engaging with them in live sessions.
Absolutely. And so there's literally all kinds of feedback. It's like never ending amounts of feedback for whatever your position is, if you're a person giving the feedback or if you're the person receiving the feedback. And then how often do you think feedback could be given? Obviously, you can say pretty much anything and you would be correct. But how often do you think maybe feedback should be given if it's coming from that standpoint of what you just said?
Well, it depends, I guess, on the type of feedback that you're giving, because the
Right.
purpose of feedback is that you allow opportunity for growth and improvement. So if you give feedback every day, are you really allowing opportunity for improvement? So there has to be a significant amount of time between the evaluation taking place. So, I don't know, from a performance review standpoint, a month, but from a teacher standpoint, it might have to be a couple of days or a week when you're dealing with students.
Absolutely. That's a great point too, because you can definitely not wait long enough to give that person an opportunity to change, which is perfect. So we're going to talk about the 7 elements of effective feedback. So first, I'm just going to kind of go over these 7 things, and then we're just going to break it down. And I'm going to try to save time by just kind of breezing through them so we don't waste too much time specifically about each one. But there are definitely things that make feedback more effective. And these 7 things will make your feedback more effective. The first one is goal referenced. That's the first thing that feedback should be. Tangible and transparent, actionable, user-friendly, timely, ongoing, and consistent. So we're going to just go through each one briefly here. The first one is making sure that your feedback is goal referenced. You want it to be goal oriented. So you want to say, this is the goal coming forward from getting the feedback to what that looks like in the future. You want to have a goal for yourself. You want to have a goal for the person that you're giving the feedback to. One way you can do that is by connecting the task, the objective, and the action. So that's one way to kind of say, okay, here's the goal. This is what the task is, the objective for that goal, and what is the goal for the action going forward for that person receiving the feedback. The next one is you want your feedback to be transparent and tangible. What does that mean? That means that you want the feedback to be very clear to the person who's receiving it. And you want them to have an end product that is clear to them. So you want to say, hey, this is what again, it kind of goes back to the goal. This is what we want our end product to be. I want to make sure students are this, or I want to make sure my employees are this, and it should be specific. You shouldn't just say do better. That doesn't help anyone. So we want to make sure that when we're giving feedback, we're doing it in a way that is clear for the person receiving it. And there's no like big questions like, what did they just tell me to do? You're very clear about what it is you want done. The next one is actionable information. So of course, it's great to hear, okay, here's my goal, but when the person's receiving the feedback, if they don't know how to do that, that doesn't really help them. So what we really need is to make sure that there are next steps for that person who's receiving the feedback. We want to give them a direction to work towards. So we want to say, hey, here's our goal. Make it very clear to understand for the person. And then also you want to say, here's how you do it, and give them a direction to work towards. The next one is being user-friendly. You want your feedback to be something that's easily understood. So if you're making a sheet that you fill out, a template, something like that, where you're going to be giving the feedback, you want it to be something that they can look at and it will be very easy for them to understand. There's no reason to overcomplicate your feedback to the point where the person who's receiving it does not understand what they're looking at or what you're saying. And so that also kind of makes it important for the person receiving it that they're getting that timely correction too, because you want the person who's receiving the feedback to say, okay, that makes sense. I can do that. You don't want to throw things at the person where they feel like, well, that's impossible, or it doesn't make sense for what you're asking, kind of like what you were saying before when you said you can't give them feedback every day. So you want to make sure that it makes sense to the person and that they feel like, okay, I can do this. The next thing is timely. You want your feedback to be timely. You want to take action quickly. So if you're giving somebody feedback on something they did a year ago, that's not very helpful. So we want to make sure that we are addressing any concern right away, because what does that do? That helps them improve better because something just happened. It gives them that opportunity to say, oh, whoops, let me try again. Instead of saying, oh, by the way, last year when this didn't go well, then you're not even remembering what it is that was going on in the first place. And so that doesn't really help the person. You want it to be a timely thing, feedback right after, and then you continue on and on. The next one is you want it to be ongoing, as of course we just said, and we talked about the cycle. So feedback needs to be ongoing. It should never end, really. As humans, we should always want to be improving, no matter what it is in any aspect of our lives. So that in mind, you can have really complex goals. You can have this big, lofty goal that you're working towards, but we want it to be broken up into manageable chunks. And so sometimes when we do that, it actually makes it better because we can go from one little goal to the next, to the next, to the next. And that kind of helps the cycle, because if you break it up into those manageable chunks, then each of those cycles has its own chunk it's working on, and it's more manageable for the person. And so that being said, we would want that the feedback to be done often. So maybe it is once a week, maybe it is once a month, maybe it is every few months or 6 months. But if it's done consistently, as we're just about to talk about right now, we can keep that cycle going. And so what does consistency offer? This is probably my favorite piece of effective feedback, because it doesn't matter how great that feedback is, if it's completely different the next time you talk to that person, it doesn't really do anything. It's not helpful at all. So we want the person receiving our feedback to trust us. We want them to trust what we're saying, and we want to make sure that what we're saying is accurate. And so if you are very consistent in the way that you give the person the feedback and what that feedback is, even from person to person, if you're overlooking a bunch of different people, or if you're a teacher overlooking students, you want to make sure that they can trust what you're saying, that it will be the same the next time you come across it, and the goal would be the same. You don't want to switch up that goal on them, then they'll lose trust in you, because they'll say, well, you told me to do the other thing last time, and it's not really going to make much sense. So we want to stay consistent. We want to gain trust from the person that we are giving feedback to. And of course, we would want to be accurate in what we're saying. So that's kind of a brief overview of those 7 elements of effective feedback. Do you have any questions about that? Any comments? What's your favorite one out of those 7, you think? Or maybe the one that speaks to you the most?
Probably the one that speaks to me the most is timely. And then probably the one that might be the most challenging for me is goal referenced.
Okay. Kind of hard to get those goals.
Yeah, sometimes it's more like, when you're providing feedback. I was just grading some papers before I came into this session. So when you're providing feedbacks to students, and you're grading papers, it's hard to identify, like, the goal is for you to pass class. So, It's hard to focus that in. But when I'm, doing some reviews with teachers, and, just looking at that, it's I don't have access to, like, their personal goals as a content lead. That's something between them and the department chair. And I'm just trying to help them improve on whatever areas I might see. So it's hard for me to say, like, this is the specific goal you need to focus on, because that's going to come from the department chair that I'm not necessarily privy to unless they tell me. So I'm trying to, you're trying to find that happy medium.
That makes sense. And you probably are very limited sometimes in what you can say to somebody in regards to goals. But I guess it would be more like maybe when we get to the manageable chunks part of this, it would be just the part that you can help them manage, and then leave the other parts to the people that can do that for them. So maybe that's a good point though, because we can't always make everybody's goals for them. Just maybe what we can affect positively would be what our goal would be. Thank you very much for sharing that. So how do we connect our effectiveness to the feedback we're giving? Well, we're probably going to get close to running out of time here, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through these. But the first one, feedback phobia, is a real thing. I mean, there are people that just despise feedback, any kind of feedback, because it makes them uncomfortable. And so we want to keep that in mind when we approach feedback with people. We want to make sure that we make them comfortable enough that we actually have productive conversations after that. We don't want them to feel so uncomfortable that there are no positive effects of it. So if we get that comfortability, then we can work on going forward, how is that going to look, and making sure it's a productive session of feedback. And then building confidence is huge, because it kind of goes hand in hand with that, because if somebody's confidence is totally broken, they're not even going to want to try to do better. And so we want to make sure that when we are making them comfortable, that we are also making them feel confident that they can achieve what we're asking of them. And then it kind of goes straight into the next one, which is my favorite, clarity and positivity, because I believe that there is always something positive that you can say when giving feedback. There's always something that you can say to them that's going to make sure that they understand your intention, your intentionality, and just knowing that, hey, you care, you're there to help, and you want them to be less defensive when it comes to the feedback. And so keeping that positive attitude, I think, is a really good way to make sure that you're going forward in a positive direction from the feedback. The next one would be accepting ideas and suggestions that come to you. So you want the people that are hearing your feedback to respect you, as you should respect them. And so that being said, you should be able to at least listen to any ideas or suggestions that come your way. Does that mean you need to listen to every single thing? Absolutely not. But if you're willing to listen, sometimes that can be all that they need to have that respect piece with you, and then you can move forward in a positive way. And then the last one would be always get feedback on your feedback, which sounds funny, but we, as I said before, we can always improve, even when we're trying to help other people improve. And so we should want to improve on the way that we're doing that. And if we're missing any piece of the puzzle, we should want to work towards making that better for everyone involved. Alrighty, so we have two things. I know she said we have 5 minutes, so we're just going to go real quick. There are two kinds when it comes to performance management, would be formal or informal. And so how is that going to look? Our formal ones are going to be those ones that you do, those annual performance reviews, scheduled meetings, regular one-on-ones, all that good stuff, assessment tools. Those are the formal observations and the formal feedback that come after that. And then your informal ones are those ones where you're just having casual conversations, group discussions, when you have people all together. So they're definitely those two pieces, and they're not always applicable for whatever it is that you're going forward talking about the feedback. So we'll just skip over these tips. I do have them in my takeaway document, so you'll be able to take a look at these, but just a few tips that just help you in general with feedback. And sometimes maybe we don't think about it. So like this one, the ongoing performance management issue is not appropriate to bring up at an annual review. You would not do that at the end of the year. It wouldn't make much sense, especially if it's an ongoing issue. You would want to address it quickly, as we spoke about earlier, with being timely in our feedback. And then, of course, how often to do feedback. If you're doing it often, the way that you should, it should be weekly, monthly, yearly, all the above. And so we have a scenario we're going to think about here. Kind of goes hand in hand with the formal informal thing. So here's the situation. Jason usually gets his tasks done, but they are often late and the work is clearly rushed. He has a great attitude with his colleagues, but he often jokes around too much and makes some of them feel uncomfortable. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've personally dealt with some people that may fall into this category. What do you think would be the appropriate feedback to give a person in this situation? Do you think that they should have formal or informal feedback?
Formal feedback.
Okay, and why do you think that?
Well, the key for me here is that some of his behaviors make other people feel uncomfortable. That's not a quick fix informal conversation. That's something that's going to have to be more formal and require maybe additional training on his part.
Absolutely. And you know what, too? If it's something that it sounds like it's happening all the time, then that needs to be made into a formal situation where you're addressing it, because it's not a one-time thing. This is something that is kind of ongoing. And so maybe it even should have been addressed earlier. So yes, I agree with you. Formal, absolutely. And there are plenty of different ways you can take this scenario, but we don't have the time to talk about it today. But I do agree with you that a formal approach and formal feedback for this kind of situation is definitely going to be the most effective. And so what I'm going to leave you with today is just our conclusion statement here, which is feedback is an amazing and necessary tool to utilize if done promptly and correctly. And I personally, as I said before, love feedback. I love to give it positively because it has a little bit of a bad rap. So I love to give feedback because I really try hard to make it positive and make it motivational for the person to want to improve. Because you can give someone all the feedback in the world, but if they don't even feel like they can either achieve what you're asking of them or that you have any confidence in them, then they're not going to want to do anything about it. And so feedback is awesome. Do you have any questions about anything? Any comments you want to leave with me? No? All right. Well, I think
Thank you.
Huh?
This was great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. I'm so grateful you came because you're my only one here. So thank you for coming. I don't know what I would have done if you didn't. I would have probably given no one the presentation, but thank you so much. I think she might want us to hop back in the main room. I'm not quite sure, but I'll let you go in there and then we'll see if she calls us back in. But thank you again, Natalie. Have an awesome day.
You too. Thank you.